Hello and welcome to LemsleySpeaks. If you are a poetry enthusiast, if you write your own poetry or poetry is just your bag, then please like this video and subscribe to this channel because there's going to be a lot of content dedicated to poetry. I'll either be discussing my own work or I'll be promoting the work of other poets out there that I believe really deserve some recognition. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump into this week's poem. It was one of my own pieces of poetry. I'm not going to give any preamble before it because I think that might take away from some of the impact of the piece. But stick around after the poem because I'll be discussing the issues that are brought to light. Brazen. 2,500 years ago in the plaza, a man is bundled into the hollow brass belly of a bull. The king orders the locking of the door on the side and thereby traps the man within. Beneath the bull, a fire is lit. Inside, the man is roasted alive. The bull is designed with a system of pipes inside which serve to amplify the sounds of screams. To spectators, those sounds are like those of a raging bull, it seems. From out the snout, the smoke of burning flesh does freely stream. A few days ago, I heard about how a white policeman killed a black pedestrian in the street. He knelt on the black man's neck and took away his right to breathe. We've learnt so very little, you see. It isn't surprising, for learning means little in the minds of beasts. I don't feel that it's acceptable to silently be anti-racist. I feel that whatever one can do to stand up and make your voice heard needs to be done, and this is me doing that. This is me making a start. It's a belated start, but it is a start. I have my words, I have my poetry, and I feel obliged to use it to make my voice heard. I would urge you to do the same as well in whatever way you can. So I'll start off by discussing the title. Brazen. There's a couple of layers of meaning to this title. The first two stanzas of the poem discuss this method of execution used in ancient Greece 2,500 years ago. It was called the Brazen Bull. A huge brass statue of a bull was made and it was hollowed out inside, and so a person would be put in there, trapped in it, a fire set underneath it and roasted alive. So there's a little bit of historical context there. But to bring it more up to date, when I saw that police officer murdering George Floyd in broad daylight in the street, I couldn't help but notice that that policeman just seemed calm and confident, absolutely certain that he would suffer no sanctions, no punishments, that it was absolutely fine to commit a racist atrocity in the middle of the day on a street in America. His attitude, his body language, his demeanour just seemed brazen. That added to the ghastly shock of the reality of the situation. The opening line of the poem is important for me. 2,500 years ago, I really need to emphasise the fact that we have been treating our fellow man horrendously for centuries and centuries and centuries, and it just has to stop. So 2,500 years ago draws attention to the timescale of the horrific way we treat each other. The opening line of stanza 3 is simply a few days ago. I use that line to introduce the discussion focusing on the murder of George Floyd. I didn't say the specific date. I didn't say it was 3 or 4 weeks ago. I said a few days ago because that keeps it much more up to date. Just trying to echo the fact that this keeps on happening. It's going to happen tomorrow, it's going to happen next week, it's going to happen next year, it's going to continue. So that is the truth of the society that we are living in today, and that's why it really, really must change. I chose to refer to the policeman that murdered George Floyd as simply white policeman. I think that clearly highlights the problem, the institutional racism in the American police. So simply white policeman draws attention to the sharp end of the problem in America. I also didn't want to use that person's name because I don't see him as a person, I see him as a beast, which is reiterated in the very last word of the poem. I don't want to glorify or draw attention to this policeman. He will simply be white policeman and therefore a symbol of the systemic racism that we are suffering. In the same light, I chose not to use George Floyd's name. I wouldn't have a problem at all in drawing attention to the man, George Floyd. I refer to him as a black pedestrian. It's important to use the word black because race is at the heart of what we're talking about here. I use the word pedestrian because there's a vulnerability about a pedestrian. They are vulnerable to traffic, they are vulnerable to cars, they are vulnerable to cyclists. By the very definition of the word pedestrian, they are not in a strong position. There's a sense of being an innocent party, and that hopefully emphasises the brutality of the killing. I also didn't use George Floyd's name because I didn't want to do a disservice to the tens of thousands of black people that have suffered as a result of systemic violence. And I'm not just talking about police brutality in the US, I'm talking about police brutality and systemic racism in the UK and all over the world. And I'm talking about hundreds of years of slavery and horrendous exploitation of black people throughout the centuries. In ancient Greece, this horrendous execution took place in the plaza. I think it was interesting to put that little location note in there because it's very similar. It's a very public place, just like the street is for us. Whereas in ancient Greek times, an execution in a public square or in a plaza would have been a spectacle for spectators to come and watch. The king would be thereby instilling his rule by fear. There is a difference for us now because the plaza, our forum of seeing these things, is not only the physical street where these things occur, but it's social media. It's the hundreds of lenses and cameras that are pointed at atrocities now, so we are able to bear witness to the shocking reality of the world that we live in. And through sharing our social media things, through this platform that I'm speaking on now, we're in a position to document and hold these people more to account, and it gives us a better chance of fighting back and making that change that needs to happen. It's very important in the first stanza that I draw attention to the king. He decided that he wanted a new, more brutal way of killing his enemies or his rivals or people that just got on his nerves. And so he commissioned a bronze metalworker to come up with something new, and this bronze metalworker came up with the Brazen bull, one of the most barbaric execution devices ever conceptualized and created. But it was the king that ordered that. It was the king that ordered the execution. And 2,500 years later, here we are, and things haven't changed that much. It's just that our leaders are a little bit more subtle. They hide behind the idea of democracy. Democracy is broken. That rule by fear is still there. The king in ancient Greek was a ruling power that allowed it to happen. Today we've got Donald Trump, we've got Boris Johnson, we've got Xi Jinping in China trying to take over Hong Kong, we've got Vladimir Putin in Russia trying to take over. You know, the people in power are condoning and championing misery for the rest of us. They are beasts, they can't learn because they don't want to learn. Why would these leaders want to learn? They have all the power, they have all the wealth. So what's another racist murder by a policeman on a black man on the street? What's another Grenfell Tower setting on fire in the heart of London? You don't ever see the houses of rich white people clad in flammable material, do you? We have to force change, and that's why I wrote this piece. In support of the Black Lives Matter movement, in support of the demonstrations and the protests, in support of debanding racist police forces, in support of the removal of statues. When you pinch someone, they cry out. When you oppress and enslave and murder people for centuries and centuries and centuries, there will be civil unrest and statues will be forcibly removed. So there you have it, that's my piece, Brazen. If you've enjoyed this content, if you appreciate this piece of poetry, please hit like, please subscribe, and watch out for my next video where I'll be recommending two awesome poets doing it brilliantly out there in the world of social media poetry. Thanks ever so much for listening. I'll catch you soon from LemsleySpeaks. Much love.